So we're heading into the third weekend of Advent, and when we look at the Gospel, we see how John once again comes into the story. This time around, John's in prison. Jesus is doing his ministry, and John sends out his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you who we're looking for, or should we continue to look?" And I kind of wondered, why would John do something like that? John was there at Jesus' baptism. He knew who Jesus was, but yet at some of his final days, he sends out his disciples to ask Jesus this question. And then I kind of come to think that he probably did that knowing what was going to happen to him. He knew who Jesus was, but he wanted his disciples to know who Jesus was. So the disciples went, and of course they listened to what John wanted him to do. They asked Jesus, and Jesus said, "Go back to John and say that all the things you've seen, how the blind can now see, all the miracles that have been worked." So the disciples probably went back and reassured John, just in the same way that even though we know who Jesus is and what he's come into our lives to do for us, that sometimes we have misgivings too. We ask, "Are you sure? Are you sure he's the real one?" Especially in this world that we live in, when people are trying to sway us from following the Catholic religion. And here we have John sending out his disciples, and so when they come back, they realize that yes, Jesus is the right one. The story then takes a twist, and Jesus then turns to the people around him that have been following him through his ministry. And at this point, the people have to realize that John the Baptist was probably an unsavory kind of fella. He lived in the wilderness. He dressed probably not the way that they dressed. So Jesus turns to them, and he starts to explain to them. And instead of berating John for John daring to ask if he was the chosen one, he turns to them and talks about what a wonderful messenger John was, and how John, through the biblical stories, had been foretold that he would be the messenger. Jesus wants us to be the messengers too. He wants us to be like John, although we could never hope to be as great as John was. But John led a life being poor, and he lived by himself, but yet he was probably one of the greatest messengers ever. So that's what we're called to do, be messengers, and to not be the kind of messenger that is a kind of person who wants all the glory and all the fame, but a quiet messenger in the background, giving a good message for everyone to hear for our third weekend of Advent.